Hello everyone and welcome to RaceWeek for the review of the 2020 British Grand Prix. And all I can say about that is what just happened. It all looked fairly stale for the mid part of the race, and then in the final few laps it just exploded. And I can't remember the last time that we ever had can't remember any time ever that we had a driver drag their car across the line to win the race with a puncture. I don't remember that. So, let's talk about the race. So, there was heartbreak before the race got underway, as Nico Hülkenberg's car would not fire up before the start. They tried their best to fix the issue, but unfortunately it was not to be. And he could not take the start. I mean, it can be said that now Sergio Perez didn't actually miss out on much, considering that obviously that's what he would have had. But it was gutting for Hülkenberg after all the work that he did. Of course, I mean, he stated that he's not confirmed to be back next week yet, but we should expect that he is. But the race got underway. Valtteri Bottas actually got a better start than Lewis Hamilton. He attempted to go down the inside of the first corner, but Lewis stood his ground and he could not manage, while Charles Leclerc got a very good start and almost managed to get ahead of Max Verstappen. But the safety car was deployed at the end of the first lap as Alex Albon and Kevin Magnussen made contact at Club Corner. Magnussen went into the wall, safety car came out. I thought Albon's penalty was a bit harsh because I thought Magnussen did open the door and Albon was always going to go in. But that was what happened, and Albon did still drive well in the end. Then, when the restart, Lewis checked out. And then we had 6 laps, and then we had another safety car after a dramatic crash for Danny Kvyat, where it appears his right rear tyre failed going into maggots, and he went straight off into the barrier and he was lucky actually to hit the tyre wall, because the tyre wall he literally hit the edge of the tyre wall. Had he gone a few meters, a metre or two down the line, he would have hit the armco, which would have been a much bigger impact. But that brought out quite a lengthy safety car. Lewis pulled away, and then he had Lando Norris making it around the outside of Daniel Ricciardo at Luffield. And then you had Romain Grosjean, who did a good strategy decision, but once again from Haas. But he then did some debatable defensive driving against some other cars and was holding up quite a few drivers. He was eventually passed and he eventually went into the pits. And then here you have Pierre Gasly getting past Sebastian Vettel. This was for the final point position at the time. An AlphaTauri passing a Ferrari on pure pace. Shows how bad things are for Ferrari. But then you had Ocon attacking Lance Stroll, who really struggled for race pace today. But Ocon did manage to get through in the end. I believe he got around the outside of Stowe. And then it kicked off. Valtteri Bottas was running in second. The Mercedes were complaining of seemingly having a lot of issues with blistering towards the end of the race. But then Bottas's tyre failed. His left front tyre. And unfortunately, it happened at the last corner as well, when he just passed the pits. He had to do an entire lap with a punctured tyre. And he went in, and then he dropped out to the points. And then Carlos Sainz had a failure, which dropped him out of the points. And then all eyes were on Lewis Hamilton, because his tyres looked as bad as Valtteri Bottas. And there was this feeling in the air. I'm not sure if it was the same for others, but certainly the case for me. I had this feeling that it was going to happen to Hamilton. And sure enough, it did on the last lap. And then... But this wasn't a case of how far back he was going to drop. It was the last lap. He had a 33-second gap to Max Verstappen. So, all eyes were on, would Lewis still win the race? Because he had a good enough gap to coast his car to the line. And the gap went down like 5 seconds per corner as Max Verstappen was closing. And we were all at the edge of our seat. I was actually saying... Because I am a regular attendee of the British Grand Prix. I've been pretty much every year up until now since 2013. Imagine what it would have been like being in the crowd, seeing Lewis Hamilton coast round, say, especially at Stowe and Vale, which is where I've sat over the past few years, seeing Lewis Hamilton coast round with a tyre to see if he was going to win. But he did. He managed to drag his Mercedes across the line before Verstappen got there. And he won the race with a punctured tyre. As I said, I'm not really sure that has ever happened before. He won the race I'm not really sure that's ever happened before. And what a finish. It looked so stale midway, but then it just kicked off. And here is the full result. It was Lewis who won the race, ahead of Max Verstappen in second. Charles Leclerc, considering the Ferrari, he is quickly becoming like Fernando Alonso in 2014. He has been dragging a very difficult car to places where it simply does not belong. Like, that Ferrari does not belong on the podium. But yet, Charles Leclerc managed to get onto the podium. Daniel Ricciardo finished in fourth. A great result for Renault in the end. He managed to get past the McLarens, getting past Lando Norris in the end. Esteban Ocon finished in sixth ahead of Pierre Gasly. One of the best races of his career, I'd say, for Pierre Gasly. Alex Albon, he served his 5-second time penalty in the pits. And then he managed to work his way up to P10 in the end. But that he got promoted to P8 by the various things that went on. Lance Stroll would have been disappointed with ninth. Sebastian Vettel, miserable weekend for him. He'll probably be thankful that he even scored a point. He just managed to fend off Valtteri Bottas because he was on his rear just before he crossed the line. Antonio Giovinazzi finished in 12th ahead of George Russell, who had reasonable race pace. Did George Russell? He was on par with the Alfa Romeos. Then you had Carlos Sainz, Nicholas Latifi, Romain Grosjean after some antics, and Kimi Raikkonen after a front wing failure towards the end of the race. He finished as the last of the finishers, with Kvyat, Magnussen and Hulkenberg as the retirements. Now, I'll be going back to the Formula 1 later, discussing how each team did before and the driver standings, but now let's talk about the feeder series races which took place this morning. Of course, F1's main feeder series race took place before the Grand Prix got underway this morning, and it also saw a lot of action, did the Formula 2. Dan Ticktum was on reverse grid pole, and he led the way going into the first corner from Drugovich, who started in second, but Drugovich then dropped back. In the early stages, Guan Yu Zhou was progressing up the order. There was a virtual safety car at the start because Callum Ilott tapped Yuki Tsunoda into a spin at Village. And Callum Ilott did actually then get a penalty for it. But Guan Yu Zhou his teammate was making moves, and he made a brilliant double overtake on both Mazepin and Drugovich. He managed to take two cars in one. And then Callum Ilott, after he received his penalty, he was on the move, getting past Lundgaard, and he was catching Dan Ticktum. But he then lost it on the exit of club, and then brought the safety car out, which brought the safety car out. He stalled his car, and he lost it on the exit of club. There are a few cars that decided to pit, a few strategical mistakes, which I'll go on to in a moment. But Christian Lundgaard pitted, and he had a crack at the win. He managed to get past Guan Yu Zhu, and then he managed to get past Delatrez. And he was catching Dan Ticktum, but it proved to be too little, too late. One more lap, Lundgaard would probably have had him. But Dan Ticktum took his maiden Formula 2 victory. Ahead of Christian Lundgaard in second, Louis Delatrez in third. Jehan Daruvala finished in fourth, ahead of Nikita Mazepin in fifth. Felipe Drugovich in sixth. Nikita Mazepin in seventh, with Jack Aitken taking the final point in eighth. Guan Yu Zhu actually had a spin on the final lap, and he finished in ninth, with Marcus Armstrong rounding out the top 10. Artem Markelov finished in 11th, had a Marino Sato in 12th. And as I mentioned, there were some strategical mistakes, and that was in the form of Prima. They waited a lap to pit both Schwartzman and Schumacher, and then they stacked the cars, dropped them, which really cost Schwartzman, and they messed up Schwartzman's stop. A lot of the issues that both drivers had this weekend were team errors. Not really Schwartzman's fault, and he had a kind of a lucky escape. Then you had Samaya, Nissany, PK and Alesi as the last finishers, and the retirements were Giotto, Galeo, Eilert and Tsunoda. Callum Eilert will be ruining that. He had a real chance to gain points on Robert Schwartzman. I'm not really sure. They didn't really show how Mick Schumacher, because he was ahead of Schwartzman, but on those fresh tires he dropped back for some reason, and they didn't really show what actually happened on the TV. But it was an interesting weekend, and the drivers' standings are a bit too late to get to actually type them in. But Schwartzman still leads. He has an 8-point gap back to Callum Eilert in second. Christian Lundgaard is in third in the standings. He's had a great season so far. Head of Nikita Mazepin. Dan Ticktum's in fifth. Head of Guan Yu Zhu, who had a better weekend despite his spin at the end. Then you had Louis Delatrez, Felipe Drugovich, Mick Schumacher, who has a mountain to climb if he wants to be in title contention, with Yuki Tsunoda rounding out the top 10. So now talking about the Formula 3 race, which opened up proceedings here at Silverstone today. And it was Alexander Smolia on pole position, and he pulled away going into the first corner. But the championship leader, things did not go well for. Oscar Piastri went into the gravel on the exit of Luffield and dropped way down the order. Smolia was actually extending a gap. And then you had then the safety car was deployed after Igor Fraga stopped on the Wellington Straight. And then David Beckman got a lot closer to Smolia. And then there were some defense. And then Alexander Smolia was really weaving down the straights. I mean, I didn't really see much wrong with that, as the Beckman wasn't alongside. He was doing that really to break the toe. But the stewards took a dim view of that, as you're going to hear about later. Oscar Piastri then in the end retired as his DRS stuck open. Whilst you had Frederick Vesti and Liam Lawson having a battle for 5th place. And David Beckman did have quite a few chances of getting past Smolia, but Smolia was wise to it, and he in the end managed to fend him off to take the win, and he crossed the line. But the win would not stand, as he received a time penalty for his weaving on a straight line, which resulted in him getting a time penalty, a 5-second time penalty, which in the end dropped him to 6th. So it was David Beckman that in the end took a second sprint race win, and he is really coming into this fight. David Beckman, he is a legitimate title contender. Clement Novalak, he had a good race. He finished in 2nd ahead of Alex Peroni, who takes a 2nd podium of the year. Frederick Vesti finished in 4th, ahead of Logan Sargent in 5th, Alexander Smolya in 6th, who drops to 6th, Liam Lawson in 7th, he's had a good weekend. With Teo Porcher in 8th, he'll be slightly disappointed with his weekend after a good weekend in Hungary. Richard Verschoor finished in 9th, with Jake Hughes taking the final point in 10th. Then you had Zendelli, Barnico, Malvesiti, Williams, Schumacher, Viscal, Hauger, Stanek, Fittipaldi, Futrell, Fleur, Sebastian Fernandez had more bad luck today after a car issue on the formation lap, which then resulted in him getting a time, unable to reclaim his position in time by the time of the safety car line, which is in the rules that you have to be in your grid position, and he got a time penalty. He got a 10-second stop-go penalty, which I thought was a bit harsh. But then you had Dunner, Nannini, Das. Coolwell got his car repaired and he got out. He raced today. Duhan Deleda, with Piastri and Fraga getting the final points. Oscar Piastri does still lead the standings, but his retirement results in his gap being reduced to 17 points. David Beckman is now up into 3rd, ahead of Frederick Vesti in 4th. Liam Lawson's in 5th, ahead of Teo Porcher in 6th. Richard Verschoor in 7th. Alex Peroni is in 8th. Clement Novalak in 9th, with Jerome Zendelli rounding out the top 10. Now let's do, in reverse constructors order, let's do a team-by-team review on how the weekend went for each F1 team. Better race pace today for them. They struggled with race pace but the upgrade seems to work. They were competing with the Alfa Romeos, and I think it's just a matter of time before George Russell gets their first point of the season. Was looking quite good, but Romain Grosjean could not quite maintain his points position, and he in the end had to pit. He came under fire for quite a few defensive tactics. Interesting to see if the stewards do something about it, because he got a black and white flag and then he moved across on Ricciardo in a very dangerous move. So it'll be interesting to see what actually happens with that, if there's going to be any further punishment. But another disappointing day for Haas. This car is really struggling for pace. They were nowhere. They seemed to have slower race pace than Williams did at Alfa Romeo. They have a mountain to climb if the 2 points that they got in Austria isn't their only points this season. AlphaTauri, a mixed day. Obviously, Danny Kvyat had that big crash as a result of a tyre failure. But Pierre Gasly, I believe, had one of the best races of his career. He was fighting with a lot of the cars, and he managed to work it. He earned his place in the points in the end. He worked really hard for a well-deserved 7th place. And it was a good drive all round. AlphaTauri currently sit on 13 points, but quite a way behind the others. Quite a way behind the cars ahead. Their best race this season with a 4th place and a 6th place. Daniel Ricciardo finishing 4th, Esteban Ocon finishing in 6th, And they are actually closing on the likes of Racing Point, Ferrari and McLaren. McLaren actually stated that the Renaults were quicker than them in race trim today. Lando Norris stated that in an interview. Disappointing day for them. And disappointing weekend for them as a whole. That the car they thought would have pace here. But losing one of their star drivers before the weekend, and him being unable to participate with them having to draft a driver in last minute, was not ideal for them in the slightest. I think Sergio Perez would have driven well. I feel really bad for him, how it must have felt sitting on the sidelines today. But Lance Stroll struggled for race pace, and obviously Hulkenberg never got started. And they have actually dropped behind Ferrari in the Constructors. Once again, they lacked pace, but Charles Leclerc managing to drag that car to the podium. A really good effort from him. They are actually back ahead of Racing Point. How long that will last, I don't know. But Charles Leclerc, what a drive to be able to finish in third in that car. He is proving to be one of the stars of the season so far. He's managed to get this car to places it really does not belong. And we have McLaren. They could have been better for them if Carlos Sainz didn't have his tyre failure, but Lando Norris finished in 5th in the end, collecting more good points for McLaren. McLaren had good race pace today. Well, I think Red Bull will be ruining pitting Verstappen at the end, because that may well have cost them victory. And Verstappen almost managed to close. It will be interesting to see what his radio was at the end of the race. But he almost managed to close onto Lewis, but it wasn't. He didn't quite manage. He had a very lonely race in third, but obviously with the things that happened at the end, he was close to actually winning the race. But Red Bull currently sit in second in the Constructors. But of course, we have one more team to talk about. The car, once again, was dominant, but the tyre failures were the only thing that went wrong for them and stopped them from taking a crushing 1-2 victory. But Lewis Hamilton just managed to hold off. He just managed to hold off Max Verstappen despite his puncture. And Mercedes currently lead the Constructors by 68 points. They are definitely on for a 7th consecutive Constructors title. And talking about the drivers' standings, I'll have them listed when I do the midweek recap. But Lewis Hamilton leads the way on 88 points. He now has a 30-point gap back to Valtteri Bottas in second. Max Verstappen is in third, actually only 6 points behind Bottas. Ahead of Lando Norris in fourth, who's 3 points ahead of Charles Leclerc. Alex Albon is in sixth on 26 points, ahead of Sergio Perez, who's in seventh, after obviously with his withdrawal from this race. Lance Stroll is in eighth, level on points with Daniel Ricciardo, with Carlos Sainz rounding out the top 10. Ocon is 11th, head of Gasly. Sebastian Vettel has dropped outside the top 10. Head of Giovinazzi, Kvyat, Magnussen, with Latifi, Raikkonen, Grosjean and Russell yet to score. But that is it from the Race Week review. We'll see you on Thursday for the midweek recap. And of course, where we will preview the 70th anniversary race. And we will see you then. But what we can say is, what just happened in the British Grand Prix. Goodbye.